Hey guys, tonight we walk barefoot through dust and lamplight into a place where the past is not a vibe, not a filter, but a physical object you could drop on your foot and immediately regret. You are standing in a museum basement that smells like old paper, dry stone, and that faint, polite tang of air conditioning that has been working overtime since before you were born. The lights are low and warm, and the shadows feel careful, like they do not want to disturb anything. Somewhere behind glass, clay tablets rest like sleeping animals. And yes, you probably won't survive this, not because it is dangerous, but because your attention span is about to get tested by 5,000-year-old paperwork. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are here, drop your location and your local time in the comments, because I love the idea of all of us listening under different ceilings of night. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the threshold where public history ends and the back rooms begin. A staff badge beeps, a door clicks open with a sound that is too modern for what waits inside. For a second you feel like you are sneaking into the ribs of the building, into the part that holds its secrets, not its exhibits. The corridor is narrow, the kind that makes you unconsciously pull your elbows in. Your footsteps become quiet without you meaning them to. On the walls, plain metal shelves run like highways, stacked with boxes that do not look important at all. That is the trick of archaeology. The world-changing thing often arrives looking like a lunch container. Then you see them not in a heroic spotlight, but in a drawer in a tray, in a padded cradle meant to keep clay from chipping. Tablets. Not one or two. Dozens, hundreds. Small rectangles and rounded lumps, some the colour of baked bread. Some darker like old cinnamon, some with pale mineral bloom on the surface, like a quiet frost. The cuneiform signs are tiny wedge marks pressed into clay, and your brain tries to read them the way it reads your language, fails and resets. Your eyes want to turn them into patterns. Your mind wants to pretend it understands. It does not yet. A curator or maybe a conservator offers you gloves, thin cotton. You pull them on and instantly feel less capable. Gloves always make you feel like you are about to fumble everything, which is perfect because what you are holding is not just an artifact. It is a moment that refused to die. Here's a mainstream fact that sounds boring until you notice what it implies. Writing in Mesopotamia begins around the late 4th millennium BCE, and early cuneiform starts as accounting lists, rations, tallies the unglamorous skeleton of a city learning to manage itself. That means the first written words of civilization are not poems about love. They are basically receipts. Humanity invents writing and immediately uses it to keep track of barley. Honestly, that checks out. You lean closer to one tablet in its tray. It's not big, maybe the size of your palm. The wedges are sharp and clean, like the scribe pressed them yesterday. You can almost see the stylus tip, the reed cut at an angle, the tiny decision of each push into wet clay. Your throat tightens in that weird way it does when you realize you are sharing air with something that old. The tablet does not care. The tablet is calm. The tablet has been calm through empires, looters, curators, wars, shipping crates, and the invention of the smartphone. The staff member points to a line and murmurs that this one is a ration text. A worker receives so much grain. Another worker receives so much beer. Beer, by the way, is not a fun extra. In ancient Sumer, it is an everyday staple, thick and cloudy, sipped through a straw to avoid the floating bits. A quirky tidbit you can picture instantly is the little cylinder seals and artworks showing people sharing beer from a jar with long reeds, like it is the world's oldest boba tea situation. Only instead of tapioca pearls, you have fermented grain clumps. Delicious, probably, and very on brand for early humanity. But you did not come down here for beer rations. Not exactly. You came for the feeling that some tablets do not just record life, they argue with it. They hint. They provoke. They leave a door cracked open. The staff member slides out another tray, and you see a fragment broken at one edge, a piece of a larger story. Fragments are the daily reality of this work, and also the perfect metaphor for how you know the past. You know it in shards. You learn to love the jaggedness. The fragment has a few lines that have been copied and debated and translated and retranslated. The person here cannot show you everything, not the rarest pieces, not the ones under stricter access, but they tell you about the genre. There are myths, hymns, royal inscriptions, legal disputes, letters, school exercises, omen lists, medical recipes, and laments that sound like cities crying. Yes, cities. Sumerian literature sometimes treats a city like a person who can grieve. Imagine your hometown writing a sad poem about itself. That is the emotional range we are dealing with. And somewhere in that range is what people love to call forbidden truths. The phrase is dramatic. It sells. It makes your thumbnail glow. But down here in the basement, the truth is quieter and stranger. The so-called forbidden part is often not a secret society guarding knowledge. It is the simple fact that the tablets do not match the clean story you learned in school. Because the story you learned is tidy. Humans are hunter-gatherers, then agriculture, then villages, then cities, then writing, then laws, then empires. A neat staircase, a museum timeline with arrows. But the tablets are not arrows, they are voices. And voices do not move in straight lines. You hold that thought while looking at a tablet that seems almost playful. It is a school text practice. Signs repeated, lines, the ancient equivalent of filling a page with the alphabet until your wrist cramps. The scribe who wrote it might be a student bored, tired, desperate to go home, wishing the teacher would stop correcting wedge angles like a grammar cop with a reed stylus. That detail is oddly comforting. Even 5,000 years ago, someone is stuck doing homework. Then you see a tablet that is not homework. It is myth. And myth is where the temperature changes. A myth tablet does not announce itself with fireworks. It looks like the others. They're clay, wedges, silent. But the content is different. It speaks about God's decisions and the shape of humanity. It is not a documentary. It is not a diary. It is a cultural dream, and historians still argue whether certain lines in Sumerian myths are meant to be taken as literal memories, symbolic theology, political propaganda, or just a good story performed aloud to make a crowd lean in. That debate matters because your entire night is going to live inside it. You imagine a Sumerian temple courtyard at dusk. The air smells like smoke, warm mud, and river reeds. People gather the way humans always gather to hear a story that tells them who they are. A singer or a priest or a trained reciter begins. The words are older than the person saying them. The crowd knows parts by heart. They laugh at familiar jokes. They hush at familiar warnings. In your head, the voice blends with the hum of the museum air vents. And then comes the line that makes modern people sit up. Not because it says aliens, not because it reveals a hidden code, but because it frames early humanity in a way that feels uncomfortably modern. It talks about humans as made for work, made to carry burdens, made to feed a system bigger than themselves. Whether that is literal creation or a metaphor for social order is debated, but the emotional punch lands either way. The tablets do not flatter you. They do not call you the crown of creation. They call you useful. You swallow. Your cotton gloves squeak faintly against the tray edge. Your brain tries to protect you by joking, so here is a joke. Congratulations. You travelled 5,000 years into the past and discovered that management has always existed. Somewhere an ancient god is writing performance reviews in cuneiform, and yes, they will still mark you as needs improvement. The staff member tells you about provenance, about excavations, about how many tablets were pulled from ancient cities like Nippur, Lagash, and Uruk, often from temple archives or palace libraries or private houses. Some were baked intentionally for permanence. Many were accidentally fired when buildings burned, which is one of history's cruel little ironies. Fire destroys, but it also preserves. A disaster becomes a kiln. The archive survives because the city suffered. PG-13 tragedy, no gore. Just the quiet ache of that fact. You look again at the fragments and feel how much is missing. Not just physically missing pieces, but missing context. A tablet might mention a name everyone knew then, but nobody knows now. A myth might reference a ritual gesture we cannot fully reconstruct. A line might be a pun that dies in translation, and yet despite all that loss, the voices still get through. There is another thing the staff member mentions casually, as if it is not the kind of sentence that makes your skin prickle. Some tablets were copied again and again across centuries. Scribes preserved certain texts the way you save a favourite song. That means these stories were not random. They were chosen. They were taught. They were performed. They were loved or feared or respected. Now you notice how your body has changed. Your shoulders have dropped. Your breathing has slowed. The basement hum has become a lullaby, and the tablets in their trays feel less like objects and more like a room full of sleeping mouths. Forbidden truths. Early humanity. Big phrases. But the real hook is smaller. It is the sensation that someone long dead pressed a reed into wet clay to pin a thought to the world, And that thought is now touching your eyes. You lean in closer and let your imagination do what it does best. You picture the scribe, the wet clay, the reed stylus, the quick hands. You picture the river nearby, the Euphrates or Tigris, moving slow and brown. You picture a city where mud brick walls glow in late sun. You picture the smell of bread and beer and animal pens. You picture the nervous energy of a world that is inventing itself, and you realize your night has begun in the only honest way it can. Not with certainty, with the door opening, with clay in your hands, with a question that refuses to behave. You leave the basement in your mind without actually leaving it. The door stays closed, the trays stay still, but your attention steps sideways into the world those wedges come from, like you have found a hidden staircase in the air. And now instead of fluorescent museum calm, you are standing on sun-warmed earth beside a river that does not care about your modern schedule. The water is wide, slow and brown, carrying silt like it is carrying time itself. The air tastes dusty and wet at the same time. Reeds hiss when the breeze moves through them, and insects do their tiny engine noises in the heat. You squint into a flat horizon where the land looks simple until it suddenly becomes not simple at all. Because ahead of you, rising out of the plain, is a city. Not a fairy tale city, not a marble one, not one with dramatic mountains behind it for the postcard. This is a mud brick city, sun-baked and practical, the colour of bread crust and dried clay. It spreads outward like a living thing. Walls, alleys, courtyards, rooftops, storage rooms, workshops. Smoke from cooking fires curls into the sky in thin ribbons. Somewhere a donkey complains loudly, which is basically the ancient version of a car alarm. This is Uruk, one of the earliest and largest cities of ancient Mesopotamia. And here is your mainstream historical fact for the night. By the late 4th millennium BCE, Uruk becomes a major urban centre, often linked to the rise of true city life, bureaucracy, and early writing. It is not the only place where humans get clever, but it is one of the places where cleverness turns into a system. You walk toward the gate with the slow, dreamy pace of someone who does not want to spook the scene. The ground under your feet is hard-packed and warm. Your shadow is short because the sun is high enough to make everything feel exposed. Inside the walls, the city smells like baked mud, sweating bodies, crushed herbs, and grain dust. It smells like work. And that is the thing that hits you first. This is not a city built around leisure, it is built around organising life. You hear it in the sounds, the rhythm of labour, the constant movement of people carrying something. Baskets, jars, bundles of reeds, slabs of clay. Everyone is busy and nobody looks like they are doing it for the aesthetic. You pass a row of workshops where clay is kneaded and shaped, where someone presses a reed stylus into a damp tablet. The gestures are quick and practiced, like a cashier scanning items, only the scanner is a sharpened plant, and the receipt will last longer than the building you are standing in. The scribe does not look mystical. The scribe looks tired. You drift closer because you are curious, and also because you have the soul of a person who would absolutely read the fine print on a contract. The tablet being made is not a poem. It is a list. This person gets this much grain. That person gets that much beer. Another person gets oil. It is the city feeding itself ration by ration, like it is inventing a daily routine and daring you to call it boring. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear the modern world being assembled in tiny cliques: inventory, payroll, storage, distribution. Your morning, in other words. Wake up, eat, go to work, get paid, complain, repeat. The only difference is that your paycheck is a measured scoop of barley and your office is a courtyard full of goats. You walk past a temple precinct where the buildings are larger, the courtyards cleaner, and the sense of authority thicker in the air. This is where the city's spiritual and economic life overlap, because in early Sumer temples are not just places to pray. They are institutions that manage land, labour and goods. Think of it as a combined church, bank, warehouse and human resources department. If that makes you sleepy, good. If it makes you nervous, also good. Now you see why clay tablets matter. They are not decorative. They are control. They are memory. They are proof. They are the city saying, I know what I have. I know who owes what. I know who belongs where. And here comes your first light joke, gently placed like a pillow. You always think the future will be run by flying cars and robot butlers, but somehow it is still run by paperwork. Uruk would look at your email inbox and nod sadly. As you wander deeper, you notice something else. The city is not just organised. It is layered. There are people with clean hands and people with cracked hands. There are people giving orders and people receiving them. There are people who move through temple courtyards like they own the air, and people who keep their eyes down because the air belongs to someone else. This is where the forbidden truths start to feel less like secret sci-fi and more like uncomfortable anthropology. The tablets do not always talk about humanity as a heroic march. Sometimes they talk about humanity as an arrangement, a hierarchy, a labour force, a collection of mouths to be fed and backs to be worked. You pause by a marketplace where fish glisten on mats and baskets of dates sit in the shade. Someone argues over a measure because humans have always loved two things, fairness and winning. A child runs past you with a bit of bread. A dog follows. Life is ordinary here, and that ordinariness is the real shock. Civilization is not a lightning bolt. It is a long habit. Now for a quirky tidbit that makes the scene feel real in your hands. Among the earliest known written signatures in Mesopotamian accounting is a name that appears on multiple tablets, Kushim. It might be a person, it might be a title, it might be a role like accountant, but either way, you get this weirdly intimate moment where a single identifier repeats across clay. Imagine 5,000 years from now, someone finding your name on a bunch of receipts and deciding you must have been important because you bought groceries consistently. The immortality you deserve. You walk on and the city keeps building itself around you. There are canals cutting through neighbourhoods carrying water where it needs to go. There are gardens inside walls, small patches of green, like someone insisting the world can be softened. You spot a line of workers carrying reeds, and you realise how much of this city is plant and mud and muscle. Even the grandness is made of humble materials stacked with obsessive care. Above it all, you see a monumental temple platform rising a man-made hill, an early expression of reaching upward. Later, people will call these ziggurats. Here in Uruk, the great temple complexes like Eanna become centres of worship and administration. You climb a slope slowly because sleepy pacing is the rule tonight, and because climbing stairs in ancient heat is how you learn respect. Halfway up, you stop and look back. The city stretches wide rooftops like a textured sea, and now you feel the second joke drift in. You know that feeling when you open a new productivity app and it promises to organise your entire life. Uruk is the original productivity app, except the subscription fee is your soul and the user interface is wedges in clay. The wind up here is stronger. It cools your skin. It carries distant sounds, hammering voices, animals, water. You sense that this city is a machine made of people, and the tablets are the gears that let it turn without collapsing into chaos. But there is a wrinkle, and this is where historians still argue whether you are looking at a smooth evolution or a messy negotiation. Historians still argue whether the rapid growth and influence of Uruk reflects a kind of organised expansion, even colonisation, or whether it is mostly trade networks and cultural exchange that spread styles, seals and administrative habits. The evidence is scattered across sites, patterns of pottery, architecture and the paperwork itself. The debate is real and the uncertainty is part of the story, because if Uruk is a model, then it is a model with shadows. It invents systems that feed people, and it invents systems that trap people. It invents record keeping, and it invents the ability to reduce a human life to a line on a tablet. It is impressive and it is unsettling. You drift back down into the streets. The heat softens as the day leans toward afternoon. In a quiet corner, you see a scribe rolling a cylinder seal across wet clay, leaving a tiny carved scene. Animals, figures, symbols like a personal brand, before branding becomes a marketing job. The seal marks ownership, identity, authority. It is beautiful and also a little intimidating, like a signature that comes with power behind it. Here is your third joke, small and sleepy. You think you invented self-expression, but Uruk already has custom stamp art for people who want their paperwork to look stylish. Somewhere an ancient influencer is like, "Do not copy my seal design." As the light shifts, you realise the odd detail that makes the neat textbook story wobble. The city does not feel like a simple first step. It feels like a complicated decision humanity keeps making. Do we want freedom or do we want structure? Do we want the wild or do we want the storage room full of grain that keeps us alive through winter? Do we want to be individuals or do we want to be counted? Uruk does not answer you out loud. It just keeps moving, busy, breathing, recording. And you walking through it in your mind feel the same strange tension the tablets carry. The past is not here to flatter you. It is here to show you how early, how quickly humans learn to build cages that also feel like homes. You move closer to the writing itself because at some point you realise the clay is not just carrying stories, it is carrying a method. And the method is almost rude in its simplicity. You take mud, you shape it, you press a reed into it, you let it dry, and suddenly your thought has a body. You crouch in the shade of a courtyard where a small group gathers around a low table. The table is stained with water and clay, the way a baker's table is stained with flour. A scribe sits there, not theatrical, just focused. In their hand is the tool that turns sound into permanence, a reed stylus cut at an angle, making a triangular tip. The scribe does not draw lines. They press. Each press leaves a wedge. That is what cuneiform is at its most basic, a system built from tiny repeated pushes into wet earth. Here is your mainstream historical fact for the night. Early Mesopotamian writing begins as pictographic marks, simple signs for things like grain or sheep, and over time those signs become more abstract and standardized into cuneiform wedges. The system shifts from pictures to a flexible script that can represent words, ideas, and later syllables, which is how it becomes powerful enough to write literature, law, science, and everything in between. You watch the scribe's wrist move with the calm confidence of someone who has done this thousands of times. The wedges line up in neat rows. Some are horizontal, some vertical, some angled, and you start seeing the logic. It is like watching a code language that your brain cannot run yet, but your eyes can still admire. You know the feeling like opening a spreadsheet full of formulas and pretending you understand it by nodding thoughtfully. The scribe pauses, wets the clay slightly, and continues. You notice that the tablet is small for a reason. Clay is heavy, and nobody wants to carry a brick-sized memoir across town. Practicality shapes literature here. Even the dreams must fit in your palm. Now the tricky part begins because what you are seeing is not one simple alphabet. Cuneiform is a script that evolves for a very long time. A single sign can function in different ways depending on context. Sometimes a sign stands for a whole word. Sometimes it represents a syllable. Sometimes it is a marker that tells you what category a word belongs to, a little hint scribes add for clarity. Modern people love to act like ancient writing is mystical, but half the time it is just scribes trying to avoid confusion, like putting a label on a box so you do not accidentally store your winter socks in the rice jar. You lean in and imagine how it feels to learn this. Not the romantic version, but the real version, the aching hand, the smudged clay, the teacher watching your wedge angles like a hawk. Scribal training is serious business. Students copy lists of signs again and again. They memorize vocabulary lists, including long lexical lists that categorize the world, trees, stones, animals, professions, divine names. It is the ancient version of studying for an exam, except the exam can literally decide if you become important or become someone else's labour. First joke of the section, soft and sleepy. You think your school had it rough with cursive practice. But imagine getting graded on whether your triangle wedges have the correct attitude. One sloppy press and the teacher is like, "Congratulations, you just wrote goat instead of grain." And now the temple is confused. As you watch, someone brings a broken fragment to the table. A piece of tablet irregular with only a handful of signs. It looks like nothing, and yet everyone treats it like it matters. Because it does. A fragment can be a missing sentence in a myth, a missing name in a legal dispute, a missing number in an accounting text that makes the whole record finally make sense. This is where your modern brain gets humbled. You are used to complete pages. Here, completeness is rare. Tablets break. Corners chip. Lines wear down. The clay flakes. A flood softens the surface. A careless hand scratches it. Even a perfectly preserved tablet is still a voice from a distant world full of references you do not automatically catch. So how do scholars read it? They start with signs, of course. They build sign lists. They compare copies. They look for repeated formulas. They match patterns across thousands of texts. They pay attention to where a tablet is found, a temple archive, a palace storeroom, a private house, because context changes meaning. They study handwriting styles, how a particular scribe shapes a wedge, like identifying someone by their font. And when they can, they look for joins, those rare satisfying moments when two broken pieces from different boxes fit together like a puzzle, and suddenly the past becomes a little less fragmented. Quirky tidbit time, because you deserve something oddly human. Scribal school texts sometimes preserve little bursts of personality, including complaints and proverbs, and even insulting lines that sound like students messing around. You can almost hear the classroom energy. A bored student presses wedges that are technically practice, but also carry a mood like someone doodling in the margin of a notebook. The clay may be ancient, but the vibe is very I am tired of homework. Second joke. Gentle. Ancient scribes do not have autocorrect, but they do have something worse. A teacher who can read your mistakes out loud in front of everyone. Imagine your typos being preserved for 5,000 years. Somewhere in the future, a scholar is like, this student misspelled barley, and you want to crawl into the underworld. Then comes the language problem, and this is where the idea of forbidden truth gets interesting in a quieter way. Sumerian is a language isolate, meaning it is not clearly related to any other known language family. It stands alone. That does not make it supernatural. It just means the linguistic family tree has a branch. We cannot connect to the others with confidence. That isolation makes the work harder because you cannot lean on close cousins to guess meanings. You have to build understanding from inside the texts themselves, from patterns, from bilingual lists made later from centuries of scribal tradition. And yes, historians still argue whether certain lines in literary tablets are literal history, ritual, poetry, political messaging, or storytelling designed to sound ancient even when it is being reshaped by later scribes. That debate matters because it changes how you read claims about origins, kings, floods, and gods. A line that sounds like a chronicle might be a metaphor. A line that sounds like a metaphor might be a memory. The uncertainty is not a failure, it is the honest texture of ancient evidence. You notice a different kind of tablet being brought out, one with a cleaner layout. It is a copy, not an original composition. That happens often. Texts get recopied over generations, sometimes with variations. Sometimes the scribe updates a sign, sometimes they smooth a phrase, sometimes they introduce an error that becomes traditional because later scribes copy it too. You begin to see how a text is not a single frozen thing, but a living tradition like a song passed along by ear, except it is passed along by reeds and clay. Here is a fringe-flavoured tidbit that people love to argue about late at night. Some enthusiasts claim certain signs or phrases hide coded messages, secret knowledge or technical descriptions of things far beyond the ancient world. Most specialists push back hard on that idea, pointing out that scribal conventions explain a lot of the weirdness, and that translation is a careful comparative discipline, not a vibe-based treasure hunt. But the reason this fringe idea persists is emotional. When you stare at wedges you cannot read, your imagination wants to fill the silence with something dramatic. The mind hates a blank space. Third joke, because you need a little air. Your imagination sees mystery, your brain sees homework, and the tablet sees both, and just sits there like, relax, I am literally mud. Now you look at the fragment again, and let yourself feel the patience involved. Translating is slow. Sometimes the sign has multiple readings. Sometimes a word appears only once, and scholars have to infer meaning from context. Sometimes the line is damaged, and reconstruction becomes a careful guess, marked as such. Sometimes new fragments change older interpretations, not because anyone was lying, but because the evidence shifted. That is the part that feels forbidden to people who want certainty. The truth is provisional, it evolves. You breathe out slow and steady. The courtyard sounds soften. A bird calls once from somewhere high. The scribe sets the stylus down, and the tablet sits wet for a moment, glistening faintly. You realize the real secret of these texts is not that they hide a forbidden message. It is that they demand a forbidden skill from you, patience, the willingness to sit with partial knowledge, the willingness to accept that the past is not a neat story handed to you, but a language you have to learn one wedge at a time. You let the wedges settle in your mind until they stop looking like marks and start sounding like breath. And once you can hear the breath, you notice something else. The tablets are not only about counting grain and naming workers. Some of them are about the big restless problem you carry around in your own chest. You are alive. You know you are alive. You also know it ends. That knowledge follows you like a shadow, even when you pretend it does not. In the Sumerian world, that shadow is not politely ignored. It gets a story. It gets a king. It gets a name that still feels heavy on the tongue. Gilgamesh. You step into Uruk again, but now you are not focused on storehouses or canals. You are focused on the walls. They rise high, thick, sun-baked, confident. A city wall is the ancient version of saying we belong to ourselves. You walk beside it with your hand almost touching the rough brick. The surface is warm, gritty and uneven. You can feel how many palms have brushed it, how many backs have leaned against it, how many tired people have looked up and believed the wall meant safety. Here is your mainstream historical fact for this section. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest surviving works of long-form literature preserved on clay tablets, in various versions over many centuries, with the best-known later form often called the Standard Babylonian version. Even if you never read it, parts of its imagery have leaked into the world like ink into water. Now, the story itself does not arrive in your mind like a neat book with chapter numbers. It comes like a voice in a courtyard, a rhythm repeated until you remember it. It tells you Gilgamesh is king of Uruk, powerful, dazzling, and also unbearable. He pushes people too hard. He takes too much. He acts like the world is his personal gym. You know the type. First joke placed gently. If Gilgamesh lives today, he definitely posts motivational quotes that are just threats in cursive font. The gods in the story respond the way a group chat responds when one person will not stop being a problem. They decide he needs a counterweight. They make Enkidu a wild man, shaped from clay and breath, living among animals, running with gazelles, drinking at waterholes. You picture him with dust on his skin and the calm eyes of someone who has never been stuck in traffic. The meeting of Gilgamesh and Enkidu is not polite. It is a collision. They fight. They struggle. They exhaust each other. Then something shifts and the fight turns into friendship. The emotional core of the epic is not the monsters or the gods. It is this friendship. It is two beings realizing that strength is not only about dominating others, it is also about being seen. Together they go looking for glory, because young power always thinks it can earn meaning by being loud. They travel to a cedar forest. They face Humbaba, the terrifying guardian. They defeat him. They bring back cedar, and the story lets you feel the arrogance of that victory, the sense that the world can be harvested and conquered. Then the story turns because it always turns. The goddess Ishtar is rejected by Gilgamesh, and in response, she sends the bull of heaven. More conflict, more triumph, more noise. And then the penalty arrives. Enkidu falls ill. He weakens. He becomes a body that cannot do what it used to do. You stay with him as he fades because even in a myth, illness feels familiar. It feels like a room getting colder. It feels like the world continuing outside while your focus narrows to breathing, to water, to the sound of someone trying to be brave. When Enkidu dies, something breaks open in Gilgamesh that no enemy could break. Grief empties him out. He sees death clearly for the first time and he panics. Not a loud panic, a deep animal panic. The kind that pushes you out the door at night and makes you walk without knowing where you are going. Second joke, very soft. Gilgamesh is basically the first person in literature to realise, oh no, I forgot to plan for retirement. He leaves Uruk. He wanders. His hair grows wild. His clothes become travel rags. He becomes for a while the opposite of a king. He is just a human on a road begging the world for a loophole. He seeks Utnapishtim, the man who survived the Great Flood and was granted a kind of immortality. This is where the epic contains one of its most famous echoes. Utnapishtim tells a flood story. The gods decide to send a flood. A warning is given. A boat is built. Animals are loaded. The waters rise. The world becomes water. Birds are released. The waters recede. A sacrifice is offered. The gods gather around it like hungry flies, which is a weird image, but myths are not here to be polite. Historians still argue whether flood narratives in Mesopotamian literature preserve cultural memory of real catastrophic floods in the river plain, or whether the flood functions mainly as a mythic reset that explains why life is fragile and why humans must live with limits. Both can be true in different ways. The debate stays open because the evidence is not a single clean answer. You listen to Utnapishtim and you feel something unsettling. The flood story is not presented like a bedtime moral. It is presented like a glimpse into how ancient people understood power. The gods are not always gentle. The world is not built for fairness. Survival can depend on a warning, a relationship, a lucky decision. Utnapishtim offers Gilgamesh tests. Stay awake. Endure. Prove yourself. Gilgamesh tries, but his body does what bodies do. He falls asleep. And that moment is important because it is not heroic. It is true. You can be a king, you can fight monsters, you can build walls, but you still lose to a warm room and a quiet mind. Third joke, quiet and kind. Gilgamesh learns the hard way that the real final boss is a nap. In some versions, he is offered a plant that can restore youth. He gets it. He thinks he has cheated the system. Then while he is bathing, a snake takes it. The snake slips away, shedding its skin, renewing itself, leaving Gilgamesh with empty hands. The message lands without shouting. Immortality does not belong to you. The world renews itself without asking permission, and you do not. He returns to Uruk. He looks at the walls again, and now the walls mean something different. They are not just defense. They are legacy. They are the thing that might outlast him. The epic does not end with a magical solution. It ends with acceptance, which is the most grown-up ending possible, and honestly the most irritating if you are hoping for a secret cheat code. Now, the forbidden truth part, the thing people whisper about in modern conversations, is not that Gilgamesh proves aliens or secret technologies. The forbidden truth is that a 5,000-year-old story is already telling you what you spend your whole life trying to avoid. You cannot outmuscle time. You cannot charm death. You can only build meaning while you are here. There's also a quirky, more academic thrill in how this epic survives. The story exists in multiple tablets, different versions, and different languages, and parts of it arrive to us from fragments found in different places. Sometimes a single newly identified fragment can change a translation, clarify a scene, or restore a metaphor. That is not forbidden, but it is thrilling. It means the epic is still in a way being discovered. And now for the fringe-flavoured tidbit that keeps late-night forums buzzing. There are persistent rumours that certain missing pieces of the tradition once contained lines that would rewrite everything, describing impossible visitors, strange lights, or instructions too advanced for the ancient world. The truth is more grounded and more interesting. Large gaps exist because clay breaks, archives scatter, and copying traditions shift. The missing parts invite fantasy because humans love filling silence with spectacle. Still, the existence of gaps is real, and it does create a shadowy space where imagination can play. You let the story of Gilgamesh settle into your body like warm sand. The wall, the grief, the failed test, the stolen plant. It all becomes a quiet lesson pressed into clay. And as you stand in the city's evening air, with the river smell returning and the voices softening into night, you realize the tablets are not only revealing early humanity, they are revealing you. The same fear, the same hope, the same need to make a life that feels like more than a tally mark. You step into the temple precinct like you are entering the city's brain. The air changes first. Outside, the streets smell like dust and sweat and cooking fires. Inside, the scent turns thicker and sweeter incense and warm oil grain dust from storerooms and the faint animal musk of offerings waiting their turn. Your footsteps quiet themselves on packed earth. Even your breathing starts to feel supervised. A wide courtyard opens up bright with sunlight, and at the far end, the temple rises on a platform mud brick stacked into authority. The doorway is shadowed, and that shadow feels intentional like a stage curtain. People move with practiced purpose. A priest in a clean robe carries a bowl. A worker hauls a basket. A scribe sits near a low table with a damp slab of clay stylus, ready eyes sharp. Nobody's rushing, but everyone is on schedule. Here is your mainstream historical fact. In ancient Sumer temples are not only religious centres, they function as major economic institutions, managing land labour storage and distribution, and they generate huge quantities of administrative records on clay tablets. Worship and accounting share the same building, which tells you something about how reality works in this world. You drift closer to the scribe. The tablet in front of them is not dramatic. No thunderbolt, no prophecy. It is lines of wedges neat as a tidy garden. The scribe murmurs numbers under their breath and presses the reed into clay with small efficient movements. You get the sense that if the gods exist, they exist with paperwork. A priest passes by and the scribe glances up just long enough to confirm a detail, then returns to the tablet. The priest does not look like someone whispering mysteries into the void. The priest looks like someone managing supplies. First joke, soft and sleepy. You come here hoping for cosmic secrets, and instead you find the universe running on inventory management. Somewhere a god is asking why the quarterly barley projections are down. You follow the flow of people and arrive at a storeroom doorway. Inside, shaded and cool, are jars and baskets stacked in careful rows. Grain, oil, dates, wool, tools, everything tagged in the temple's memory, not on paper labels, but on clay tablets that track what enters, what leaves, what is owed, what is promised. The tablets are so ordinary, they become eerie. They are proof that faith is not only candles and prayers, faith is logistics. And then you notice the statue. In a side chamber, half lit, a divine figure sits or stands, carved and adorned, eyes wide and unblinking. The statue is not considered a decoration. It is treated as the god's physical presence in the temple. That is a key point that modern brains often struggle with. The statue is clothed, washed, anointed, and fed through ritual offerings. Bread is brought, beer is poured, incense curls upward. The god, in a sense, receives a daily routine. You watch attendants adjust fabric, straighten jewellery, wipe dust from a shoulder, like they are caring for a living person who simply does not move. This is where the temple feels less like a warehouse and more like a household, except the head of the household is a divine being who never ages and never sleeps. A bowl of food is set before the statue. A drink is offered. The attendants withdraw. The food will later be consumed by temple staff as part of the system. But the offering itself is real in its meaning. The god is honoured. The god is sustained. The city stays in balance. Now you begin to understand the strange blend of awe and practicality. The gods are not far away. They are here, present hungry in a symbolic way, requiring attention, requiring upkeep, requiring a schedule. You walk back into the courtyard and hear voices reciting hymns. The words are rhythmic, carried on the air like a soft vibration, a hymn to a goddess. Like Inanna might praise her beauty and power, her warlike fury, her ability to shake kings and stir desire. A hymn to a god like Enlil might speak of wind authority, decrees that shape destinies. A god like Enki might be invoked as clever, watery, full of tricks and wisdom. The names shift depending on the city, because each city has its own divine patron, its own sacred personality, like rival sports teams, but with more incense. Second joke, gentle. You think your hometown has drama, but imagine your town having a patron god who demands offerings and then side-eyes the neighbouring cities, godlike, "Oh, so they get extra oil this month." You pause near a small group of scribes and notice a different kind of tablet being handled with care. It is not a simple ration list. It is a record of offerings, a schedule of what is brought to which deity when and in what quantity. This is where the sky comes down to numbers. A divine being receives so many loaves. Another receives so much beer. Another receives oil, wool, incense. It is devotion expressed as measurable goods. And then you catch the idea that makes the whole thing feel unsettlingly modern. The gods have roles, not just personalities, but functions, domains, portfolios. They are responsible for wines, waters, fertility, war, justice, craft, kingship. The divine world mirrors an organised state. You hear someone mention the concept of the me, those divine powers or decrees that define how the world operates. Everything from kingship to craft to lamentation. In myth, the emi can be transferred, stolen, negotiated, and that is a wild thought. It implies that culture itself is not just human invention. It is a set of powers that exist as almost tangible properties. A society that thinks this way is not saying we made up laws and skills and institutions. It is saying these things are real forces sanctioned by the divine, and they can be granted or withheld. That is an idea that makes control feel sacred. Historians still argue whether these divine decrees and administrative sounding roles are primarily theological concepts, symbolic reflections of social organisation, or deliberate political tools used by temples and kings to legitimize authority. In other words, does the religion shape the bureaucracy, or does the bureaucracy shape the religion, or do they grow together like two vines wrapped around the same pole? The debate stays alive because the tablets show both worship and management in the same breath. You drift toward a smaller room where clay plaques and figurines sit on shelves. protective objects, ritual tools. Someone whispers an incantation over a little figure and places it carefully near a doorway. This is the daily fear side of spirituality, the part that worries about illness, bad dreams, curses, and wandering spirits. You do not see a horror movie. You see people trying to feel safe in a world where many dangers are invisible. Here is your quirky tidbit, the kind that makes you blink and then smile. Some Mesopotamian protective practices involve burying small figurines or placing them in hidden spots like spiritual security cameras that never blink. The idea is that the figurines stand guard, absorb harm, or confuse whatever negative force is lurking. It is the ancient version of putting a lucky charm by the door, except it comes with an official ritual and someone who takes it very seriously. Third joke, light and kind. If you think you are paranoid for double-checking your door lock, remember, there are people here installing tiny clay guardians because even the hallway might be haunted. Now, because it is impossible to mention Sumerian gods without summoning modern fringe interpretations, you feel the shadow of that conversation too. Some modern readers look at divine names and roles, especially groups like the Anunnaki, and interpret them as literal non-human visitors, advanced beings who arrived, engineered, instructed, and then vanished. That is a fringe idea that lives loudly in modern pop culture. The tablets themselves, though, sit in a more complicated reality. They are filled with poetry, metaphor, ritual logic, and political context. The gods behave like gods, not like engineers writing instruction manuals. Still, the reason the fringe idea has power is that the myths describe beings who descend, decree, measure, judge, and distribute fates in language that can feel eerily administrative. You stand in the courtyard again and watch offerings carried in tablets, press seals, rolled hymns sung. The temple is a machine of meaning. The gods are not only cosmic, they are institutional, and humans in the middle are trying to keep the system running because the system is what makes life feel predictable. The forbidden feeling creeps in again, but it's not a forbidden alien blueprint. It is the forbidden mirror. You recognize something in this world that still exists in yours. The blend of belief and structure. The way authority gets wrapped in sacred language. The way the invisible becomes a reason to obey. You let your eyes rest on the calm face of the statue one more time. The oil lamps flicker. The incense rises. The clay tablets dry in trays. The sky somehow has been turned into a schedule. You stand in a room where stories are treated like tools. Not tools you hold in your hand, but tools that shape how you think you belong in the world. The air is warm with lamp smoke and crushed herbs, and somewhere nearby someone is grinding grain with the steady rhythm of a heartbeat. Outside, the river keeps moving. Inside, a voice begins to recite words that sound older than the walls. The creation lines do not begin with comfort. They begin with problem solving. In these myths, the universe is not a peaceful painting. It is a busy workplace. The divine beings have duties, burdens, and responsibilities that sound suspiciously like the world's first job description. They dig, they carry, they maintain canals, they keep things running, and eventually they get tired of it. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the night. Several Mesopotamian creation traditions describe humans as fashioned from clay and brought into being to take on labour so that the gods can be relieved of their workload. The details vary across texts and languages, but the recurring theme is hard to ignore. Humanity is introduced as a solution to somebody else's exhaustion. You feel your eyebrows lift because that is not the flattering origin story people usually frame on a motivational poster. It is not "you were made to shine." It is more like "you were made to handle the chores." It is almost funny until you realise how closely it matches what it feels like to wake up on a Monday. First joke, soft and sleepy. Congratulations. Your sacred purpose is basically being the universe's intern. No pay, no credit, and the divine managers still expect you to smile. The recitation brings you into a scene that feels both cosmic and oddly domestic. There is clay involved because in a riverland, clay is everywhere. It is under nails on sandals in the cracks of walls. Clay is what you build, with what you write, on what you seal jars, with what you repair with after rain. So when a myth says humans are made from clay, it is not reaching for something exotic. It is reaching for the most familiar substance in life, the same substance that becomes a tablet, the same substance that becomes a brick. You picture hands scooping wet earth from a riverbank, kneading it like dough. You picture a reed mat on the ground. You picture a mixture being made not with casual stirring, but with ritual seriousness. In some versions there is divine essence involved, sometimes described in ways that later readers interpret as blood or life force, something that makes the clay more than mud. The language can be poetic and symbolic, and it lands in your imagination like a dim red glow inside a lump of earth. This is where people start arguing in both quiet academic rooms and loud internet corners. Are these lines meant to be understood literally like a memory of an act? Or are they metaphors for the way humans see themselves in relation to the land and the institutions that control it? Historians still argue whether the humans created for work theme reflects a theological explanation of why labour is unavoidable, a social commentary shaped by temple economies, or a mythic way of justifying hierarchy by claiming it is built into the fabric of creation. In other words, is this story describing the universe or describing the society that tells the story? The debate keeps going because both readings fit the evidence in different ways. You let the words keep moving and you begin to notice something even stranger. Some creation stories are not solemn. They have a sharp edge of humour. They treat the divine world like a place where egos clash and mistakes happen. There are moments that feel like satire, as if the scribes are winking at the audience. A myth might describe a feast among the gods, beer-flowing voices rising, the kind of gathering where decisions are made that nobody remembers clearly the next morning. The gods are not always portrayed as perfect. They can be petty, they can be impulsive, they can be tired, they can be frankly dramatic. Second joke, gentle. You always imagine gods as all-wise, but here they sometimes sound like a committee that should not be allowed to make decisions after 2 cups of beer. You follow one story thread where creation becomes almost like a contest. The divine figures shape humans, and then they argue over what those humans are, for what roles they will have, who gets credit. In at least one tradition, there is a sequence where different kinds of humans appear, including those who do not fit the ideal mould, and the gods assign them places in society. It can read like a strange blend of compassion and bureaucracy. Even when a person is created with limitations, the myth insists they still have a role, still have a place, still belong somewhere under the temple roof. That detail is a quirky tidbit, worth holding in your palm. These stories are ancient, but they sometimes carry a surprisingly practical, almost inclusive logic. The world contains many kinds of people, and the system finds a way to slot them into life. You can read that as care or as control or as both. You walk through the imagined courtyard where this story might be performed, and you watch the faces of listeners. They are not all scholars. They are not all priests. They are workers' parents, children, people whose hands are rough and whose backs are tired. They listen to a story that tells them why they are tired. A story that says, this is not random, this is how reality is built. Your burdens are part of the architecture. The voice reciting the myth says something like, the gods once carried the load, and now you do. And you realize how powerful that message is. It makes labor feel sacred. It makes obedience feel cosmic. It makes the daily grind feel inevitable. Now the fringe-flavoured tidbit slips in because modern people cannot resist it. Some modern readers look at the clay, mixing the divine essence, the language of making humans, and they claim it sounds like engineered creation, like a coded reference to advanced intervention, like a scientific process hidden inside poetry. It is a seductive idea, especially if you want your origins to feel like a thriller. But the calmer reading is that ancient people are using the materials and metaphors they know best. Clay is life here. Breath is life. Divine essence is the way you say this is more than mud. Still, the fact that the language can be interpreted in multiple ways is exactly why these lines keep starting fights even now. Third joke, very light. Humans can read clay and life force and immediately jump to lab experiment because apparently we cannot see mud without imagining a conspiracy. As the recitation continues, you sense another layer beneath the myth. These creation lines are also teaching you about power. They place the gods above and humans below, not because humans are worthless, but because hierarchy is presented as natural. The gods give order, humans maintain it. The temple mediates between them. The king stands as the chosen manager of the city. The whole system becomes a mirror that reflects itself. You feel the weight of it and also the honesty of it. These myths do not pretend life is easy. They do not promise you a painless world. They explain suffering and toil as the cost of living inside a structured cosmos. They give you a reason to accept the daily work of canals, fields, bricks, children and taxes without collapsing into bitterness. And yet, the lines are not only oppressive, they are also strangely intimate. To say humans are made from clay is to say you are made from the same substance as your home. To say you carry divine breath is to say your life is not nothing. Even if you are created for labour, you are still a mixture of earth and something that cannot be weighed. The recitation ends and the room falls quiet. except for the faint crackle of a lamp. You exhale slowly, and your body feels heavy in a calm way, like you have been given permission to stop fighting the fact that life requires effort. Not because effort is holy, but because effort is real. In the silence, you understand why these tablets feel forbidden to some people. They do not just give you a myth, they give you a mirror. They suggest that, from the very beginning of recorded culture, humans are aware of being used by systems larger than themselves, and they tell stories that make that usage feel meaningful. You sit with that thought until it softens into a sleepy hum like distant river water moving in the dark. You drift away from creation and into classification, because once a culture starts writing, it cannot resist organizing the invisible. Humans are like that. Give us a pen or a reed, and we will immediately start making lists. Lists of what we own, lists of who owes what, lists of which gods are in charge of which corner of reality. It is comforting in a sleepy way to imagine the universe can be sorted into columns. You're in a quiet chamber now, the kind where the sound of your breathing feels too loud. Shelves hold tablets that are not dramatic narratives. They are structured, deliberate. They look like someone tried to turn the cosmos into an index. A scribe unrolls a tablet in your mind and begins reading names, divine names, groups, titles. The rhythm is steady, almost hypnotic, like a lullaby made of bureaucracy. Some names are familiar, at least as familiar as ancient gods can be. Anu the sky, Enlil the wind and authority, Enki water and cleverness, Inanna love and war, and the kind of chaos that wears jewellery. Others are less familiar, and that unfamiliarity makes them feel like shadows. Here is your mainstream historical fact. Mesopotamian scribes compiled god lists and lexical lists that categorized deities, places, professions, objects and concepts, reflecting both religious practice and the administrative impulse to organize knowledge. These lists were used in scribal education and in temple contexts, and they show how seriously ancient people took classification. You listen as the list continues, and you notice something. Some gods are not just gods. They are functions. They are offices. They are roles in a cosmic administration. You can almost hear the job titles in the way the names appear in ordered sequences. This is where the divine world starts to look less like a stormy myth and more like a system with departments. And this is where the watcher's feeling creeps in, even if the text never uses the exact modern word. You notice references to divine judges, divine assemblies, divine decision-making, the idea that fates are decreed, that destinies are assigned, that there are beings whose job is to observe, evaluate, and enforce the order of things. First joke, gently placed. You know that feeling when you think nobody is watching, and then you realise the security camera is angled directly at you. In this world view, the security camera is a god, and it does not blink. You walk through a temple courtyard at night in your imagination. The air is cooler. Oil lamps burn in alcoves. The city sounds are softer distant footsteps and the occasional animal call. Above you, the sky is crowded with stars. In this world, stars are not just pretty lights. They are signs. They are writing. They are part of the divine language. A priest points upward, murmuring that certain constellations belong to certain gods, that movements in the heavens correspond to events on earth. The sky is a tablet too, only it is too big to carry. Now you notice a different kind of list, not gods this time, but powers. The me, the decrees, the cultural principles, the capabilities that define civilization, kingship, priesthood, truth, falsehood, craft, music, lamentation, even things like fear, wisdom, and victory. In mythic logic, these are not just human inventions. They are granted forces, transferable and guarded. Quirky tidbit time. In stories about these me powers, you can find moments where a goddess like Inanna obtains them through cleverness, persuasion, and a situation involving a god getting a bit too generous after drinking. It is almost comedic, but the stakes are huge. These powers shape how society works. The myth is saying culture is not just learned. It is stolen, gifted, negotiated, and sometimes taken when someone is not paying attention. Second joke soft. Imagine if your entire civilization was downloaded because someone got tipsy and said, "Sure, take kingship, take music, take law. What could possibly go wrong?" You sit with that idea and realise why it matters. If cultural order is divine, then changing culture becomes dangerous. If kingship is a me, then questioning kingship is not just political, it is cosmic. If justice is divine decree, then disobeying authority can feel like disobeying reality. Historians still argue whether these lists and the ME concept are best understood as theological metaphors, reflections of scribal school categories, or deliberate tools of political legitimacy used by temple and palace institutions. In other words, are the scribes describing the universe, or are they describing their own filing system and projecting it upward? The debate stays open because the texts do both. They are myth and they are ideology at the same time. Now comes the fringe-flavoured tidbit that always shows up at this point because modern imagination cannot resist a list of powerful beings. Some modern interpreters treat groups like the Anunnaki as literal outsiders, a council of non-human authorities who came down, measured humanity, and arranged early society like a project. It is a big dramatic claim, and it feeds on the administrative tone of these texts. The calmer reading is that the Anunnaki in Mesopotamian tradition are a group of deities associated with the divine assembly, and in some contexts the underworld and judgment. They are not written like astronauts. They are written like gods, which means symbolic narrative and tied to ritual meaning. Still, the feeling of a council deciding human fate is real in the mythology, and it is exactly the sort of thing that keeps your modern brain buzzing at 2 a.m. Third joke. Very gentle. If a divine council is deciding your fate, you just know one of them is the one who reads the meeting agenda out loud for 10 minutes. You move deeper into the archive room in your imagination and notice something that makes your skin prickle in a quieter way. Some tablets are not lists of gods, they are omen lists. They catalogue signs, strange births, unusual weather, odd behaviours of animals, and what those signs might mean. The logic is simple. The world is always sending messages. If you can read them, you can prepare. A scribe presses wedges that say something like, if the moon looks a certain way, then this will happen. If a dog enters a temple, then that might happen. If a child is born with an unusual feature, then it indicates something about the city's future. To you, this can look like superstition, but to them, it is pattern recognition. It is a way to negotiate uncertainty. The watcher's feeling becomes even stronger here, because now it is not only that gods are watching you, it is that you are supposed to watch everything constantly for divine signals. Imagine living in a world where every coincidence might be a message from above. Your anxiety would have a full-time job. You walk through a street and glance at the sky, and you feel the habit forming. You wonder if the wind shift means anything. You wonder if that bird call matters. You wonder if the lamp flicker is just oil or a sign. It is exhausting, and yet it can also be comforting, because it suggests the world is not random. It is communicative. You pause near a tablet that is damaged at the edges. Only the central lines remain clear. A few signs repeat. A list of names, a list of roles. The structure hints at a larger framework that you cannot fully see. And this is where the forbidden feeling returns. Not because you have found a coded alien message, but because you have found an ancient way of thinking that still lives inside you. The hunger to categorize, the urge to believe there is an order behind chaos, the hope that if you name the powers, you can negotiate with them. You step back, and in the lamplight, the tablets look like sleeping insects, their wedges like tiny legs folded in. The room is quiet. The city outside is quieter. The sky above is a dark ocean of stars. And you realize that early humanity does not just invent cities and writing, it invents a habit of surveillance, not with cameras, but with meaning. A belief that the universe is watching and that you in return must learn to watch it back. You leave the list behind and step into water, not literal water, but the idea of water as a memory that keeps returning. In Mesopotamia, the rivers give life, but they also threaten it. They can feed your fields, and then without warning, they can erase them. The flood is not a distant mythic concept here. It is a seasonal anxiety, the kind you can smell in the air when clouds gather upstream. Night settles over the city, and you walk near a canal where the water reflects a thin slice of moon. Frogs call, the reeds sway. The air feels cooler, and for a moment the world is peaceful enough that you almost forget how quickly it can change. Then a voice begins again, and the flood enters the room like a cold draught. Here is your mainstream historical fact for the night. Mesopotamian literature preserves several flood narratives, including the Atrahasis tradition and the flood episode within the Epic of Gilgamesh, which share striking motifs and reflect a long-lived cultural memory of catastrophic inundation in the river plain. These are among the earliest known flood stories in writing. You sit down in your mind as if the ground itself is asking you to. The storyteller describes the gods growing irritated with humanity. The reason varies depending on the tradition, but the tension is always there. Humans are too loud, too numerous, too disruptive. The divine order feels disturbed. And you notice something that makes you uneasy. The gods are not described as perfect moral judges. They are described as powerful beings with moods. Their decisions can feel abrupt. When they decide to wipe humanity away, it is not framed like a courtroom verdict. It is framed like a drastic solution from a frustrated authority. First joke, gentle. The divine council here sometimes sounds like a landlord who hears one more party upstairs and immediately considers flooding the whole building. In the Atrahasis tradition, the story begins with lesser divine beings doing the hard labour of maintaining the world. They dig canals, they carry soil, they build, they get exhausted, they revolt. To fix the problem, humans are created to take over the labour. That part feels like a cosmic staffing decision, but then humans multiply and their noise troubles the gods. The gods try plagues and droughts to reduce them. Humans adapt. They keep surviving. Finally, the flood becomes the reset. A warning comes not openly announced but whispered through a loophole. A sympathetic divine figure finds a way to tell Atrahasis what is coming. Sometimes the warning is framed as a message delivered to a wall, so the god can claim they did not directly betray the divine plan. It is such a wonderfully bureaucratic loophole that you almost have to smile. Even gods, it seems, worry about the rules. Second joke, very soft. Imagine saving the world by talking to a wall so you can technically say you did not leak the plan. That is not just divine wisdom, that is office politics. Atrahasis builds a boat. Not a cute little canoe, but a large sealed vessel designed to survive a world turned liquid. He loads supplies, he brings family, he brings animals, because if you are going to restart life, you need more than one goat. The sky darkens, the wind rises, rain begins not as gentle drops, but as a steady insistence. Water comes from above and below, the rivers swell, canals overflow. Fields vanish under moving brown sheets. You keep the description PG-13 and you focus on sensation rather than horror. The sound is what you remember, the roar of water, the slap of waves against wood, the creak of beams, the smell of wet reeds, mud animal fear, and human sweat, the darkness in the daytime, the way the world becomes one endless surface of movement. Then the water calms. The boat comes to rest. Birds are released to find land. A sacrifice is offered when the survivors emerge and the gods smell it drawn to it. The image is strange and raw. The gods powerful enough to flood the world are still described as hungry for the scent of offerings. It reminds you that in this world view, even divinity is tied to ritual exchange. Historians still argue whether these flood narratives preserve a distant cultural memory of real regional floods, possibly catastrophic but localized events that became mythologized, or whether the flood is primarily a mythic motif used to explain why humans suffer, why lifespans are limited, and why the relationship between gods and humans requires boundaries. The debate remains open because archaeology shows floods did happen in Mesopotamia, but myth operates on a symbolic scale that is bigger than any one event. Now you notice an even more intriguing layer, because the flood story is not just about destruction, it is about administration after destruction. The myth does not end with survival, it ends with policy. In some versions, the gods decide the flood was too extreme, or they regret the consequences, or they realise they still need humans. So they introduce measures to prevent humanity from becoming too numerous again. They establish mortality more firmly. They create social structures. They introduce roles and limitations. The flood becomes not only a disaster, but a moment where the universe gets reorganized like a city after a fire. This is where the story starts to feel like a tablet written by the cosmos itself. Disaster then rules. Collapse, then bureaucracy. Even the end of the world apparently comes with a set of new regulations. Third joke, sleepy. You survive the flood, step onto dry ground and immediately receive an updated terms of service agreement from the gods. Now the fringe-flavoured tidbit arrives with the current of modern imagination. Some modern readers point to the precise, almost technical feel of certain boat descriptions and claim it hints at advanced knowledge or hidden engineering. Others tie the flood to dramatic global theories. The safer, grounded reality is that boat building is a known skill in a river civilization. People build barges, reed boats, transport vessels. Describing a large sealed boat is not impossible. The myth uses familiar technology and scales it up for cosmic drama. Still, the vividness of the description makes it easy for modern minds to latch onto it and imagine more than the text actually supports. You walk along the canal again, listening to the water move under moonlight, and you realise flood stories do something powerful for early humanity. They compress the fear of nature into a narrative with a beginning, middle and end. They turn the unpredictability of rivers into a story that can be told, remembered, and used to teach caution. But they also reveal something a little colder. They show a universe where survival is not guaranteed by virtue. It is guaranteed by information. Someone gets a warning, someone does not. That is a harsh truth, and it is the kind of truth that feels forbidden, because it does not flatter your sense of fairness. You feel the night deepen. The city's lamps flicker in distant windows. The canal water smells of silt and plants. Somewhere a dog barks once and then goes quiet as if it remembered it is bedtime. And you sit with the flood as a memory that is older than you, older than any written page you have ever held pressed into clay, so it cannot be easily forgotten. A story that keeps returning because the river keeps returning, and because humans keep asking the same question in the dark. If the world can be wiped clean, what makes you worth saving? The night air carries voices, and you start noticing something you usually ignore. Language is not just sound, it is power. It is the invisible fence that decides who belongs, in which circle, who gets listened to, who gets charged extra at the market, and who gets politely ignored like a street sign in a script you cannot read. You walk through a busy street where lantern light pools on the ground like warm honey. A vendor calls out prices. A child laughs. A donkey complains again because, of course, it does. But the voices are not all the same. Some syllables feel sharp and clipped. Others roll softer. You catch a word you recognize as Sumerian, then another that feels different, like it is built from a different rhythm. Here is your mainstream historical fact for the night. Ancient Mesopotamia is multilingual for much of its history, and Sumerian and Akkadian exist side by side in different roles over time. Sumerian is used for daily life in early periods, then later becomes a learned, scholarly and religious language, even after Akkadian becomes dominant in everyday speech in many places. That fact sounds academic until you feel it in your body. It means you are standing in a world where writing can outlive speaking. A language can become sacred while no one uses it to complain about the weather anymore. Imagine English becoming a ritual language in the future, used only for laws and hymns, while everyone texts in something else. Your future descendants would still be saying hereby with a straight face. First joke, sleepy and gentle. One day, nobody speaks your language, but your paperwork survives. That is the dream, honestly, if you are a bureaucrat. You drift toward a scribal school courtyard where young students sit cross-legged clay tablets on their laps, reeds in their hands. Their teacher recites sign values and vocabulary. The students repeat. They copy. They erase by smoothing clay and try again. The teacher corrects a wedge angle like it is a matter of life and death, which, in a scribal career, it kind of is. This is where you meet a quirky tidbit that makes the ancient world feel strangely familiar. Scribes create bilingual lexical lists, long columns pairing Sumerian words with Akkadian equivalents, category after category tree names, stones, tools, animals, divine titles. It is the ancient version of flashcards and dictionaries combined, except heavier, and your teacher can literally throw the tablet at you if you are annoying. Not that they should, just that they could. Second joke light. You think language learning apps are intense, but here your streak ends when your clay dries too fast. You walk out of the school and into a temple corridor where a priest recites a hymn in Sumerian with deliberate, careful pronunciation. Even if daily street talk shifts, the temple keeps the old language alive, like a candle protected from wind. The sound feels ancient, ceremonial, and a little intimidating. It is not only communication, it is identity. It says we are part of a tradition older than our own mouths. Now you step into a different story, one that tries to explain language itself. The way myths try to explain everything by turning it into a drama. You are in a royal hall, or maybe in the imagined memory of one. A king sits high. Envoys stand below. Gifts are offered. Words are exchanged. And the tension is not only about wealth or territory, it is about whether people understand each other. There is a Sumerian tale connected with Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta, and within it is a famous passage that imagines a world where tongues are not divided or where the gods can alter speech, so unity breaks into confusion. It is not a simple children's fable, it is tied to rivalry power and the dream of one centre controlling many regions. You listen as if you are in the crowd. The storyteller describes a time when lands might speak with one voice, or a time when speech becomes tangled. The feeling is vivid. A messenger arrives. The message is misunderstood. A command becomes an insult. A promise becomes a threat. The room heats up with confusion, and you recognise it immediately because you have lived it in modern life too. That moment when you think you are being clear and the other person hears something totally different. Only here, misunderstanding can start wars. Third joke, very gentle. You have never truly feared language confusion until you have watched a political crisis begin because someone mispronounced a divine title. The story of splintered speech does something clever. It makes language change feel intentional, like a decision from above. Humans love that idea because randomness is exhausting. If tongues are divided by a god, then at least there is a reason. If languages multiply because of migration, trade, conquest, intermarriage, and the daily chaos of human life, then the truth is messy. Myths prefer reasons that wear crowns. Historians still argue whether the speech confusion motif in Mesopotamian literature is mainly a symbolic expression of political rivalry and imperial ambition, a reflection of real multilingual complexity, or a later literary flourish that turns everyday communication barriers into cosmic drama. The debate stays open because the texts are layered, and because language is both social and sacred in this world. You keep walking through the city and you notice how language becomes a map. In the market, sellers might use one tongue for bargaining, another for formal contracts, another for prayer. In the palace, officials might speak Akkadian, while scribes preserve Sumerian in writing for certain genres. In the temple, old words carry authority precisely because they are old. This is a forbidden truth in a quiet form. Control is not only about armies, it is about which language gets written down. Which language becomes the official voice of law? Which language becomes sacred? Which language becomes the one you must learn if you want a better life? You stop at a tablet being drafted in a small office room. A scribe writes in a formal style, careful signs, clean spacing. An official waits impatient. A seal is ready to roll. The words will turn into reality. A line on clay can move, grain a sign, labour, settle a dispute, marry a couple, disinherit a son, buy a field. Speech is air, but writing is a lever. Now the fringe-flavoured tidbit slips in because language always attracts it. Some modern interpreters claim ancient stories about divided tongues preserve a memory of deliberate manipulation, an intentional breaking of communication to prevent humans from uniting, organising, or challenging higher powers. That is a dramatic claim. The more grounded a view is that myths often turn normal historical processes into cosmic events. Still, the emotional logic behind the fringe idea is understandable. When you look at how powerful language control is, it is hard not to suspect someone always benefits from confusion. You listen to the city's many voices again, and instead of hearing noise, you hear a living archive. Every accent is a history. Every borrowed word is a footprint of trade. Every bilingual scribe is a bridge. Every miscommunication is a crack where politics can slip in. The night breeze cools your skin. The lantern light flickers. Somewhere a student groans quietly over a tablet of vocabulary, and you smile because in that groan is the real continuity of humanity. We keep building worlds, and then we keep struggling to talk about them. You step out of the city's voices and into the city's silence. The kind of silence you only get when the sun finally lets go. The rooftops go dark. Cooking fires settle into coals. The river stops sparkling and becomes a black ribbon. And above everything, the sky opens like a giant ledger page full of marks that look random until you decide they are not. Stars. Not the cute handful you see from a bright modern street. This is a sky with teeth. The Milky Way is a pale spill across darkness. Constellations feel crowded, almost pressurized, like the heavens are busy. You lie back on a roof where the bricks are still warm under your spine. The air smells faintly of dust and smoke. Somewhere a nightbird calls once and the sound seems to travel farther than it should. Here's your mainstream historical fact for the night. Mesopotamian scholars and temple experts compiled extensive omen series tied to astronomy and astrology, recording how celestial events such as eclipses, planetary positions, and unusual sky phenomena were interpreted as signs affecting kings' cities and the wider land. These traditions become some of the earliest systematic approaches to observing the heavens. You listen to a priest-scholar speak softly beside you. Their voice is steady, the way someone's voice gets when they have repeated the same knowledge for years. They point out a bright wandering star, not fixed like the others, a planet. They describe the moon's path, the way it moves through certain star groups. They know the sky like you know your phone screen, which is both impressive and a little depressing. First joke. Gentle and sleepy. You think you are addicted to scrolling, but these people have been doom scrolling the sky for centuries. A clay tablet rests near a lamp, and the scholar reads from it. The tablet is part of a long list of if-then statements. If the moon is dark on a certain day, then something happens. If an eclipse appears in a particular direction, then something happens. If a planet rises early, then something happens. The logic is consistent. The sky is a message board. Your job is to interpret it. To you it might sound superstitious, but to them it is careful observation paired with a worldview that expects meaning. They watch patterns, they record dates, they compare outcomes, they treat the sky as data, even if the conclusions are wrapped in divine language. You sit up and look at the moon. It hangs low and yellowish, and your mind tries to place it inside their system. You imagine the fear of an eclipse. Not the modern fear, where you are just worried you forgot your eclipse glasses. A true fear, where the king's fate might be threatened, where the city might be at risk, where the heavens look like they are swallowing their own light. Now a quirky tidbit slides in, because the sky is not only feared, it is also used in wonderfully practical, slightly odd ways. Mesopotamian scholars sometimes treat certain ominous events as transferable. If a bad omen threatens the king, rituals can be performed to redirect the danger. One practice involves a substitute king ritual where a temporary stand-in is placed on the throne for a short time, so that the predicted bad fate hits the substitute instead of the real ruler. Then the real king resumes his position, hopefully with the universe satisfied. Second joke, light. Imagine being hired as a temporary king because the sky is angry, and your job description is basically, please absorb the bad luck. No benefits, obviously. You watch the stars again and let yourself feel the deeper reason this matters. The sky is the biggest pattern humans can see. It is the most reliable moving thing. The sun rises. The moon waxes and wanes. The planets wander on predictable paths. If you are trying to make sense of life in a world where floods, droughts and politics can strike, suddenly the sky feels like the one place you can trust to behave. But here is the twist. They trust it so much that they believe it speaks. This is where early science and early spirituality braid together. They observe the heavens with discipline, but they interpret those observations through a world view where the gods communicate through signs. So you get something that looks like astronomy and astrology at the same time, not separated, not competing, just living in the same room. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian celestial omen traditions should be understood primarily as a form of proto-science rooted in systematic observation, a religious practice designed to manage political fear, or a hybrid that cannot be split cleanly into modern categories. The debate stays alive because the evidence shows genuine observation work alongside ritual and prophecy. You stay on the roof and watch as a faint streak appears in the sky. A meteor, quick, silent, gone. Your heart jumps anyway, because humans always react to sudden sky movement as if it matters. The priest-scholar murmurs a quick interpretation, something about direction and brightness. The words are calm, but the attention is intense. Third joke, tiny and sleepy. Somewhere in the ancient world a meteor flashes and everyone collectively thinks, well, this is definitely about me. You ask in your own mind what they do with all these signs. The answer is simple and complicated. They advise, they warn, they perform rituals, they adjust schedules, they choose when to start a campaign or delay it. They decide when to dedicate a building. The sky becomes a planning tool, not just a story. Now you wander down from the roof into a small room where a scholar keeps a stack of tablets. The room is cool. The lamplight is low. The tablets here are not myths. They are records, observations, dates, arrangements of the sky's behaviour. You see that the act of watching is a kind of devotion. It requires patience, long nights, careful memory, and the willingness to sit in darkness, waiting for the universe to do something. That waiting is familiar. You do it too. You wait for messages. You wait for news. You wait for signs that your life is on track. The difference is that their signs are written in stars. Now the fringe-flavoured tidbit comes in, because it always does when you mention ancient star watchers. Some modern enthusiasts claim Mesopotamian astronomical knowledge is too advanced for its time and must come from outside intervention. The grounded reality is that consistent observation over generations produces impressive knowledge, especially in a culture that cares deeply about patterns and records. Still, the sense of ancient people staring at the sky night after night makes it easy for modern minds to romanticize them as recipients of some external instruction. The truth is less flashy, but more human. They learned by looking. You sit again on the roof and feel the warmth of the bricks fading. The air is cooler now. The city's sounds have softened into occasional murmurs. Above you, the stars keep their slow, silent motion. And you realise something that feels almost tender. In this world, the sky is not distant. It is intimate. It is a ceiling with messages. It is a calendar. It is a warning system. It is a comfort. Because no matter what happens on Earth, the stars still appear. The moon still returns. The planets still wander. Your eyelids feel heavier as you watch that steady movement. The universe is huge, but it is also repetitive, and repetition is what makes the mind relax. In the dark, with the sky turning above you like a slow wheel, you understand why tablets and stars belong in the same story. Both are attempts to hold meaning still. You come down from the roof with the sky still printed behind your eyes, and now you notice how the city itself seems arranged like a diagram. Streets lead to gates, canals lead to fields, fields lead to storage, storage leads to temples, temples lead to the palace, and the palace with its thicker walls and guarded doors feels like the place where human ambition puts on its nicest robe and pretends it was chosen by the universe. Inside, the air is cooler, the floors are smoother, the light is filtered through high openings, turning dust into a gentle glitter. Guards stand with spears, not dramatic, just watchful. A servant moves quietly with a jar of water. A scribe sits close to a pillar tablet on lap stylus, poised, waiting for words to become policy. Here is your mainstream historical fact for the night. Sumerian city-states are often ruled by kings and officials whose authority is closely intertwined with temple institutions, and divine legitimacy and royal inscriptions on clay and stone are used to proclaim building projects, victories, offerings, and the ruler's relationship with the gods. You watch a king enter, and the room subtly adjusts to his presence. People lower their eyes. They shift their weight. They make space. The king is not just a man with power. He is a symbol of order. In this worldview, he is often framed as chosen, favoured, even installed by the gods. A priest recites a blessing. A scribe records a line. And you can feel how language creates reality. The words are not only descriptive, they are performative. They do not just say the king is legitimate, they make him legitimate. First joke, gentle. You always thought your job title was over-dramatic, but here the king's resume literally includes approved by the cosmos. You move closer to the scribe because the scribe is where the magic happens. The king may speak, but the tablet preserves. The tablet travels. The tablet endures. A royal inscription might say the king built a wall, dug a canal, restored a temple, defeated an enemy, and brought peace. It might list offerings made to gods. It might call the king shepherd of the people, which sounds sweet until you remember shepherds also control where the flock goes. Now you start seeing the pattern. The king's power is narrated as service. He builds for the gods. He provides for the people. He maintains order. That is the official story. But the tablets can all show you the mechanics beneath the story. They record taxes, labour assignments, land disputes, slave transactions, punishments, debt. You realise kingship is not only ceremony, it is administration, and administration means someone wins and someone loses. A group of officials presents tablets to the king, or perhaps to a chief administrator, and you hear numbers and obligations recited out loud. The king nods. A seal is rolled into wet clay. Decisions become permanent. It is quiet, but it changes lives. Quirky tidbit time, because the ancient world has a talent for being both serious and weirdly relatable. Some royal inscriptions are not shy. They can be intensely self-praising, listing achievements, with a confidence that feels like the ancient version of a social media highlight reel. The king is always victorious. The temples are always restored beautifully. The gods are always pleased. The enemies are always humbled. If a king wrote your dating profile, it would be unbearable. Second joke soft. You know that friend who only tells stories where they are the hero. Congratulations, you just met a king. Now you feel the scholarly tension. Historians still argue whether royal inscriptions should be treated as straightforward historical records, carefully crafted propaganda designed to legitimize rule, or something in between, where genuine events are filtered through ritual language and political necessity. The debate is not trivial, because inscriptions are often one of the main sources you have. If you take them literally, you get one picture. If you read them as performance, you get another. You walk through a corridor where wall decorations show scenes of offerings, processions, perhaps victorious images. The king appears larger than others in art because size equals importance. That visual language is simple and effective, like turning the king into a walking exclamation point. A priest speaks privately with an official. The words are low, but you sense the coordination. Temple and palace are not separate spheres. They support each other. The temple gives divine legitimacy. The palace gives military protection and centralized control. Together they create a loop. Authority feeds authority. This is where you realize the forbidden truth is not about secret tablets hidden from the public. It is about how early humans learn to wrap power in holiness, so it feels natural. You step into a courtyard where a ritual is underway. A king offers a sacrifice. He pours a libation. He says words that connect him to the god of the city. The crowd watches. The moment is intimate and public at the same time. The king is demonstrating humility before the divine, which is a smart move because humility makes dominance easier to swallow. Third joke, light and sleepy. Nothing says I am in charge like publicly showing you are obedient to someone even higher. It is dominance with a bow on it. Now the fringe-flavoured tidbit arrives because kingship and divine legitimacy always attract dramatic interpretations. Some modern readers treat references to divine selection, God-given authority, and heavenly decrees as literal evidence that rulers received direct instruction from non-human beings. The calmer reading is that divine language is the ancient world's strongest tool of legitimacy. If you want people to obey you, claiming the gods chose you is persuasive. It is not proof of visitors. It is proof that humans understand narrative power. You stand in a scribal room where a tablet is being copied. The text is an inscription celebrating a building project. It lists measurements, materials, names of deities honoured, and the king's titles. You notice how often the king emphasises building. Walls, canals, temples. In a world where infrastructure keeps people alive, building is not just practical, it is sacred. Whoever builds becomes worthy. And yet, you also sense the pressure behind the bricks. Building requires labour. Labour requires control. Control requires justification. The tablet does not show the blistered hands as clearly as it shows the king's name. You leave the palace and walk back into the night streets, where ordinary life continues. You hear a family inside a house sharing food. You smell bread. You hear a baby fussing. And you realise kingship is always above this, but it is also dependent on this. The king's legitimacy is built on the daily survival of people who never appear in inscriptions except as numbers. The city hums quietly, the palace lamps glow behind you, the temple lamps glow ahead. Between them the river moves indifferent, and you feel the central tension of early civilization settle into your body. Power is organised. Power is narrated. Power is made sacred. Tablets record it all. Not only the grand claims, but the small mechanisms that make those claims real. You keep walking slower now, letting the night soften you, and you realise the king's voice is only one voice in clay. The deeper story is how many voices are managed, sorted, and made to move in one direction. You wander into a kind of quiet that feels different from night. Night is alive with sounds. This quiet is the absence of something that should be there. It is the hush of missing pieces. You are back in a storage room of tablets, but now you are not looking at what is written. You are looking at what is not. Broken corners, cracked surfaces, smoothed away wedges where time has rubbed the meaning thin, trays of fragments that look like crumbs from a shattered loaf. A conservator lifts a piece carefully and turns it in the light. The fragment catches the lamp glow and reveals a few wedges, then nothing. The rest is blank clay where the break ripped the sentence open. You feel the urge to fill it in, to complete it, to force the past to be whole. Here is your mainstream historical fact for the night. Many cuneiform tablets survive only as fragments, and a large portion of Mesopotamian literature and administrative archives is incomplete due to breakage, erosion, ancient recycling of clay, and the disruptive history of excavation trade and dispersal of collections. You run your gloved finger near the fracture line and feel the texture change smooth to jagged. The missing part is not an idea, it is physical loss. And this is where the story takes a turn into the human side of scholarship, because what disappears does not always disappear by accident. You hear about ancient recycling first. Clay tablets are practical objects. If a tablet is not baked and it is no longer needed, it can be soaked, kneaded and reused. Imagine erasing a document by dissolving it back into mud. That happens. It means some records vanish because they were never meant to last. The temple needed the information for a season. Then the clay became something else. The past literally reshapes itself. First joke gentle. You worry about your cloud storage, but ancient archives had the ultimate delete button. Just add water. Then you hear about fires. Fires can destroy buildings, but harden tablets. Sometimes a city burns, and the tablets survive because the heat bakes them. That is a cruel trade. Preservation through disaster. You think about how many stories might only exist because something terrible happened, and your stomach tightens in a quiet way. Now you hear about excavation. Early archaeology is not always careful. People dig quickly, chasing treasures, selling artifacts, splitting collections. Tablets are removed from context, separated from the rooms they were stored in, stripped of the relationships that would help you interpret them. A tablet without context is still valuable, but it becomes lonelier, harder to place in its living environment. Quirky tidbit time, because it is both fascinating and a little absurd. In the early days of collecting, some tablets ended up in private hands, and even in decorative settings treated like curiosities. Imagine a priceless ancient text sitting on someone's mantle, like a conversation piece, next to a vase and a photo frame. It makes you want to laugh and cry at the same time. Second joke, soft. You think your home decor is questionable, but at least your throw pillows are not 5,000-year-old legal contracts. Then you hear about forgeries. Yes, people fake tablets. Clay is easy to shape. Signs can be copied. A clever forger can produce something that looks ancient enough to fool an eager buyer. Specialists learn to detect this through sign forms, language quirks, unusual combinations, tool marks, and chemical analysis. But the idea that the past can be manufactured adds another layer of uncertainty. Not every missing piece is a conspiracy, but the fact that deception exists means you must stay cautious. Historians still argue whether the most dramatic gaps in certain literary traditions are mostly the result of ordinary loss and the randomness of survival, or whether some absences reflect selective preservation, where scribes and institutions chose what to copy and what to let fade. The debate matters because it changes how you interpret silence. Is the silence an accident, or is it preference? You sit with that question and feel how much modern desire influences it. People love the idea that some tablets were hidden because they were too dangerous, too revealing, too forbidden. It is a good story. It is also often unnecessary. Most gaps can be explained by fragility, time, and the messy history of objects moving through human hands. Still, not all silence is meaningless. Sometimes a text is intentionally abbreviated. Sometimes a ritual knowledge is kept within a priestly context and not widely copied. Sometimes a king's failures are not celebrated in inscriptions. Silence can be strategic. You walk deeper into the archive room and see trays labelled with small notes, fragment numbers, possible joins. A scholar sits at a desk with a magnifying lens comparing two pieces. Their eyes narrow, their fingers hover, then slowly they align the edges and the signs. The two fragments fit. It is not a perfect fit, but close enough to confirm they belong to the same tablet. The scholar's breath catches. You feel it too, because this moment is like watching the past knit itself back together. A sentence reappears. A name returns. A missing verb clarifies a whole passage. This is not cinematic in a loud way. It is cinematic in a delicate way, like a whisper suddenly becoming audible. Third joke, light. Archaeology is basically the world's slowest jigsaw puzzle, except the pieces are mud and the picture is a civilization. Now the fringe-flavoured tidbit arrives naturally because this is where it always lives. People claim there are entire rooms of tablets that museums do not show, that certain translations are suppressed, that specific discoveries are kept secret because they would rewrite history. The truth is both simpler and more frustrating. Many museums and institutions do have large numbers of unpublished tablets, not because of secret agendas, but because cataloguing, conserving and translating tens of thousands of objects is slow and expensive work. The bottleneck is time and expertise. Still, the existence of unstudied material creates a fertile space for imagination to grow wild. You stand in front of a shelf and let your eyes blur slightly. Boxes, trays, labels. The past is not one story. It is a mountain of objects waiting for attention. Each piece is a small refusal to disappear completely. You think about the tablets that do not survive at all, the clay that was reused, the rooms that were looted, the texts that were never copied again, the voices that fell silent. You realize how much of early humanity is invisible, not because it never existed, but because it did not harden into a form that could outlast time. And that thought changes the way you hold the idea of forbidden truth. The forbidden part may not be an intentional hiding. It may be the simple fact that the past is mostly missing and you have to live with the gap. You let that gap be present without trying to fill it. The room smells like dust and cotton gloves. The lamp hums faintly. The scholar keeps working, fitting fragments together, patient as stone. Outside the river moves and the city sleeps. And the broken tablets wait in their trays like dreams that woke up halfway and could not finish the sentence. You step out of the archive room and into a different kind of noise. Not the noise of streets or markets, but the noise of modern hunger. The hunger to make the past thrilling, to make it personal, to make it about you. The clay tablets sit quietly, but people around them do not. People talk, people post, people argue. People build entire identities around what they think the wedges really mean. Wedges. You walk into a bookstore in your mind, or a gift shop near a museum exit, and the shelves are stacked with titles that glow like neon promises. Ancient secrets, lost knowledge, forbidden histories, visitors from the stars, bloodlines of gods. The words are bold, confident, and allergic to uncertainty. A tiny part of you is amused. Another part of you is tired already. Here is your mainstream historical fact for the night. Modern interpretations of Mesopotamian texts range widely from rigorous academic translation and historical analysis to speculative fringe theories, and the same ancient sources are often repackaged in popular culture with dramatic claims that go far beyond what the texts can securely support. You pick up one of the flashy books and feel its weight. The cover art shows a glowing sky figure, beams of light, a pyramid that absolutely does not belong in Mesopotamia, and a serious face that looks like it was hired to stare at you until you believe something. The back description promises that the tablets reveal early humanity was engineered, controlled, or uplifted by powerful beings. It promises a hidden truth kept from you. First joke, gentle. If a book cover has glowing eyes and the word forbidden in giant letters, you can almost hear your wallet whispering, "I should not, but I will." You set the book down and walk toward a quieter shelf where the academic style books sit less glamorous, more honest. Their covers are plain. Their titles include words like translation, lexicon, context, which is basically the publishing equivalent of eating vegetables. These books do not promise you a thrill. They promise you a headache and sometimes that is how you know you are close to reality. You sit on a bench and imagine the two worlds meeting. On one side, the scholars who spend years verifying a single sign reading. On the other side, the modern storyteller who wants one explosive conclusion by Thursday. And you sleepy listener are stuck in the middle, wanting wonder, but also wanting truth. Quirky tidbit time, because it shows how the fringe world sometimes grows from real academic complexity. Cuneiform signs can have multiple values, and translations can change as new fragments appear or as better readings become accepted. That means there are genuine shifts in interpretation over time. The fringe world often treats these shifts as proof of suppression or cover-up, when they are usually just evidence of normal scholarship, doing what it does, refining and correcting as the evidence improves. Second joke, soft. When scholars change a translation, it is not a conspiracy, it is just the ancient version of updating your phone, except it takes 10 years and requires a PhD. You walk through an imaginary online forum, now the modern kind, where someone posts a photo of a tablet and declares they have solved it. They link a theory that connects Sumerian gods to distant planets. They say early humans were designed. They say the flood was a global wipeout engineered by outsiders. They say kings were chosen by non-human rulers. The comments fill with excitement, anger, certainty. It is a digital bonfire. And you feel the pull, because the fringe stories do something your nervous system loves. They give you a clear villain or a clear benefactor. They make history feel like a thriller with a plot twist. They take uncertainty and replace it with certainty. Even if the certainty is invented, it is soothing. Historians still argue whether the appeal of these fringe narratives comes mainly from misreadings of ancient texts, from gaps in evidence that invite imaginative filling, or from deeper modern dissatisfaction with ordinary human origins and ordinary human responsibility. The debate is not only about tablets, it is about psychology. Now you see the real tension. If early humanity was uplifted by powerful beings, then your suffering is not random, it is planned. If early humanity was engineered, then your limits are not your fault. If your culture was given to you from above, then you do not have to carry the heavy truth that humans build their own cages. That is the seduction. But the tablets, in their quiet way, resist being used like that. They show humans doing human things. They show priests negotiating power. They show kings performing legitimacy. They show scribes categorizing the world. They show fear of floods and hope for order. They show beauty, grief, humour, cruelty, love. They show you that humans do not need aliens to be complicated. Third joke, light and sleepy. Humans are perfectly capable of inventing bureaucracy all by themselves. No outside help required. Sadly, now you walk back into the museum gallery and stand in front of a display case where an actual tablet sits. It looks small. It looks unimpressive. It does not glow. It does not levitate. It does not care about your theories. It is just clay with wedges, and that is what makes it powerful. It exists. It demands you meet it on its terms. You imagine a scholar explaining how translation really works. They do not claim absolute certainty. They show you sign readings. They show you parallel texts. They show you how a line might be reconstructed with brackets. They show you where interpretations differ. It is not glamorous, but it is honest. It feels like listening to someone who knows the river is dangerous and still insists on measuring its depth carefully. Now the fringe-flavoured tidbit arrives as a calmer, more nuanced thought. Even within rigorous scholarship, there are debates that can sound wild to outsiders. There are arguments about whether certain myths preserve older layers of oral tradition, whether some narratives reflect political events encoded as divine drama, whether there are hints of real environmental disasters behind cosmic language. This is not fringe in the alien sense, but it is speculative in a scholarly way. The ancient world is not a solved puzzle. That open space is where wonder can live without turning into certainty cosplay. You sit again, breathing slowly, and you let yourself hold two truths at once. One, the tablets do not require outlandish interpretations to be astonishing. Two, the human mind loves outlandish interpretations because it is hungry for meaning. You close your eyes for a moment and picture the scribe who pressed those wedges. They were not writing for you. They were not trying to feed your modern obsession. They were writing for their world, their gods, their city, their students, their king, their family. The fact that you can still hear them is the real miracle. And you realize the forbidden truth might not be hidden knowledge. It might be a quieter, harder thing. The truth that you and people like you will always be tempted to turn the past into a mirror for your desires. The past becomes whatever you want it to be unless you discipline yourself to listen. You open your eyes and look at the tablet again. It sits behind glass, unbothered. And in that calm, it teaches you the most sleep-friendly lesson possible. Slow down. Read carefully. Let mystery stay mysterious. You leave the bright noise of modern theories and return to the quiet texture of real life, because if you want to understand early humanity, you do not start with cosmic claims. You start with bread. You start with aches in the hands. You start with the smell of wet earth after irrigation. You start with the small decisions that keep a household alive. The city is waking up again in your mind. Morning light spreads across rooftops, pale gold, making mud brick walls look soft. A woman sweeps a courtyard with a reed broom. A child carries a small jar and sloshes water onto the ground to keep dust down. A man checks a doorway seal to see if someone has broken in overnight. A dog stretches and immediately looks for food like it has never eaten before in its entire life. Here is your mainstream historical fact for the night. Ancient Sumerian society includes complex urban life with specialized labor, long-distance trade, formal legal systems, and extensive agricultural management supported by irrigation networks and recorded through thousands of administrative and legal tablets. You walk through a neighbourhood and see how packed and intimate it is. Houses built of mud brick pressed close together with narrow alleys like veins. Inside one home you see a small shrine corner with a figurine or a simple offering bowl. In another you smell beer fermenting in a jar. In another you hear the scrape of a grinding stone turning grain into flour. The sound is steady, hypnotic, like the city's heartbeat. You follow that sound into a courtyard where two people work the grinding stone, one pushing, one pulling shoulders. moving in a rhythm that will become bread. Their faces are calm, but their arms are strong from repetition. This is where civilization lives, not in palace speeches, but in daily labour that nobody writes poems about. First joke, gentle. You know how people romanticize ancient life as simple and peaceful? Then you watch someone grind grain for an hour and realise your ancestors would absolutely roast your modern weakness. Quirky tidbit time, because it makes the world feel close. In Mesopotamia, beer is not just for celebration. It is a common part of rations and daily diet, and it can be safer to drink than some water sources. The beer is thick, not the clear stuff you imagine, and people often drink it with straws. You picture a morning where someone sips breakfast beer like it is normal because here it is. You pass a small medical practitioner's space, maybe a corner of a home, maybe a temple-related room. A person mixes herbs, murmurs, an incantation, applies a paste. Medicine here is not split cleanly into science and magic. A recipe might combine plant ingredients with spoken words, because healing is not only chemical, it is also social and psychological. When you are scared, words matter. Second joke, soft. You complain about reading ingredient labels, but these people have a medical recipe that is basically crush plant, say sacred words. Hope the universe is in a good mood. Now you see a court setting. Not a grand hall, but a gathering where disputes are heard, witnesses speak, and a scribe records the outcome. Legal tablets preserve contracts, property sales, marriages, adoptions, loans, and disputes. The law is not an abstract idea, it is a daily tool. Someone owns this field, someone owes this silver, someone promised this daughter in marriage, someone broke this agreement. You realise how modern this feels. People argue about boundaries, people fight over inheritance, people worry about debt, people sign contracts. Civilization is not just temples and kings, it is paperwork for ordinary conflict. And then you meet the hard edge. Debt in ancient Mesopotamia can be brutal. People can fall into debt slavery, families can pledge labour, children can be taken as collateral. The tablets record these realities with calm language, which makes them feel colder. A line of wedges can carry a human tragedy without raising its voice. Historians still argue whether the rise of early cities represents a sudden leap driven by centralized institutions or a gradual accumulation of small innovations and social changes that only look sudden because the written record makes it visible. The debate matters because it shapes how you tell the story of early humanity. Was it a fast revolution or a long, slow thickening of complexity? The evidence can support multiple readings depending on what you emphasize. You walk by the edge of an irrigation canal and watch water move into a field. The field is divided into plots. The soil is dark and damp. A farmer checks the flow, adjusting a small barrier, careful not to waste water. The canal is not just a feature, it is life. It turns dry land into grain. It also requires coordination. If one person steals too much water, someone else's crop suffers. So canals create both abundance and conflict. They require rules. They require enforcement. They require record keeping. Third joke, sleepy. You think neighbourhood group chats are dramatic. Imagine the canal dispute chat. Stop stealing water, Naram. We saw you at midnight. Now the fringe-flavoured tidbit appears in a grounded human way. The suddenness of early Sumerian complexity, the large temples, the rapid growth of writing, the structured administration can feel so intense that some people claim it must have been guided by external intelligence. The calmer view is that dense populations, irrigation needs trade, and institutional competition can accelerate innovation fast. Humans under pressure get inventive. Still, the sense of speed remains intriguing, and it is okay to feel that wonder without turning it into certainty. You sit in a doorway, shade, and watch people pass. A potter carries a new jar. A textile worker hauls wool. A merchant leads a donkey loaded with goods from far away, maybe stone, metal, timber things, the river plain does not naturally provide. Trade networks connect cities to distant regions. That alone is a quiet miracle. People travelled, negotiated, trusted, feared, gambled. They built relationships across landscapes. You hear a lullaby inside a house, a soft singing voice, a baby calming down. The sound is tender. It cuts through the city's busy energy like a thread. This is early humanity too, not only institutions but comfort, family, exhaustion and love. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine the hands that write the tablets. Those hands are the same hands that eat wash-hold, children tie sandals, fix roofs, wipe sweat. Writing is not separate from life. It is embedded in it. And that is the forbidden truth in its simplest form. Early humanity is not a clean origin story. It is a tangled mix of ingenuity and inequality, beauty and control, ritual and logistics, songs and contracts. The tablets do not give you a single glowing revelation. They give you 1,000 small glimpses that add up to a world that feels uncomfortably familiar. The morning light brightens, the city hums, the canal water murmurs, and you let the scene soften around you like a blanket because even inside the complexity, life is still made of small repeated motions, the kind that can lull you. You feel the city quiet down, not because it disappears, but because your attention narrows to something smaller than walls, smaller than canals, smaller even than a king's name. You return to the clay itself, to the idea that a human hand pressed meaning into mud, and that meaning stayed. A single tablet sits in your mind, not glowing, not dramatic, just present. It could be an offering list, a hymn, a legal dispute, a school exercise, a myth fragment. The exact genre matters less now than the sensation of proximity. The tablet is a fingerprint of thought, and thought is the one thing you are never supposed to be able to touch. Here is your mainstream historical fact for the last section. Thousands upon thousands of cuneiform tablets survive from Mesopotamia, preserving everyday records and literature that allow historians to reconstruct aspects of economy, law, education, religion, and storytelling across millennia with unusual detail compared to many other ancient societies. You hold the idea gently because it is easy to turn it into a big claim. The tablets reveal forbidden truths. The tablets prove this or that. The tablets unlock secrets. But the clay does not shout. It does not demand one interpretation. It does not insist on being a weapon in a modern argument. It just sits there, patient, waiting for someone to read slowly enough to hear it. You think about what the forbidden truths might actually be if you strip away the neon packaging. The forbidden truth might be that early humanity is not innocent. Cities bring structure, and structure brings control. The forbidden truth might be that religion and administration grow together, not because people are foolish, but because meaning is a form of stability. The forbidden truth might be that writing begins not with poetry, but with rationalists, which is honestly the most human thing imaginable. The forbidden truth might be that myths about creation and floods do not flatter you. They explain why life feels heavy. The forbidden truth might be that kings are not just leaders, but storytellers with power. The forbidden truth might be that language itself can be used like a gate, letting some people in and keeping others out. First joke, soft and sleepy. If the ancient tablets could talk, they would probably say, "Stop asking if we prove aliens and start paying your taxes, because that is the vibe." You also think about the scholarly debates that remain open, because nothing in this world is fully settled. Historians still argue whether the earliest explosion of complexity is best explained by competition between temples and cities, by environmental pressures, by trade networks, by demographic shifts, or by a mix that resists a single neat answer. Historians still argue how literally to read certain mythic lines, how to separate ritual language from historical memory, how to interpret gaps in the record. Those debates are not weaknesses. They are the living pulse of the field. The past is not a museum label. It is an ongoing conversation. Quirky tidbit time, because the last stretch of the night should still feel human. Some ancient scribes sign their work sometimes proudly, sometimes with a little flourish, sometimes by including a colophon that names the scribe, the place, or the series. You can imagine the satisfaction. A long day of pressing wedges the clay drying under your fingers, and then the small act of saying, "I was here, I did this." It is the ancient version of putting your name on a group project and hoping nobody deletes it. Second joke, light. Somewhere a scribe is like, "Do not steal my tablet, I wrote this." And then 5,000 years later you are still reading it, so technically it worked. Now the fringe-flavoured tidbits arrives one last time, because it is part of the modern echo around these texts. People will keep claiming hidden vaults of suppressed tablets, coded messages, engineered origins. The calmer truth is that the real wonder does not require those claims. The wonder is that humans became complex fast enough to surprise you and left enough records to make you feel close to them. The clay is already astonishing. It does not need extra glitter. You take a slow breath. You imagine your hand hovering near the tablet, not touching it, just close enough to feel that it is real. Your mind moves through images: a scribe in a courtyard, a farmer checking water flow, a priest offering beer, a king sealing a decree, a student groaning over vocabulary, a night watcher tracking the moon. All those lives compressed into wedges. And now the pacing begins to soften, because you are reaching the end of the journey and your body knows it. Your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches. The world feels heavier in a comforting way, like a blanket settling. The lamps in the city dim one by one. The streets quiet. The canal water keeps its slow movement. The sky turns deeper, the stars steady, unconcerned with the rise and fall of names. The tablet remains patient like a small warm stone in your palm. You let your thoughts slow down and stretch out like a cat finding the softest spot on the floor. Now the wind down begins and the language softens with it. You imagine yourself walking away from the shelves of clay, not with a dramatic revelation, but with a calmer kind of knowledge, the kind that does not spark panic or obsession, the kind that simply settles. You understand that early humanity is not a single secret hidden behind glass. It is 1,000 ordinary choices written into matter. It is the decision to record a ration, the decision to tell a story about a flood, the decision to say a king was chosen by heaven, the decision to look up at the moon and feel watched, the decision to teach a student the right wedge angle, the decision to hold a baby and sing softly while the city hums outside. And as you picture those moments, your own modern life starts to feel less sharp, less urgent. Your worries for a moment become smaller because you can see how long the human story is, how many nights have passed, how many people have tried to make meaning out of mud and darkness and breath. You let the last image be simple. A tablet drying in the air, the wedges catching the lamplight, a fingerprint pressed accidentally into the clay at the corner, an unintended signature. The tablet does not move. Time moves around it. The room is quiet. Your breathing is slow. Your eyelids grow heavy. And you allow yourself to rest inside that quiet, the quiet that has travelled thousands of years to reach you.